Thank y'all for coming here on a Friday. Yay, all four of us. All right. If you don't know, all five of us, yay, yay. So I'm Jennifer Beal. I am one of the Experiential Learning Ambassadors for this year at BSU. Do you know how to work the cameras?
Yes.
Okay, just so you can, so the online peeps can see who we have here. So what we'll do real quick is just brief introductions, your name, your department. Gail, I'm going to start with you.
Hi, I'm Gail Ramirez, Teacher Education.
Hey, Gail. Lorena.
Hi, this is Lorena from the Department of Math.
Lorena, it's good to see you again. You and I have been in a couple of these. If you want to come over to Rebecca.
Rebecca's story.
You go. All right.
I'm Kendrick Coleman, Department of English.
English. All right. Welcome. One more.
And I'm Kristen Kirshner, Department of Psychology.
Kristen. And all right. Well, thank y'all for coming. Drive the camera better. Usually this room is awesome. Technology works well in here. This is where we do a lot of our it's opposite, it's funky, our ASL classes. So yeah, up a little bit for me and zoom in. All right. Over a little bit. All right, perfect. Thank you. Tell me your name again. Obina. Thank you for facilitating for us today on a Friday. All right, I'm going to talk about some experiential learning. Yay! Are we recording?
Yeah.
We are recording. Okay, I was so afraid I was going to forget to record. Okay. So if you did everybody sign in for the QEP online? Yes, no. Okay, no worries. I can see your paper and we'll just sign in here. And we'll write down Gail. Lorena, did you sign in online?
I told Colin that I would like to attend, and Colin said that they would keep records, but I'm not sure how exactly that works.
Yes, perfect. So he asked me to go ahead and collect the sign-in sheet, so I just didn't want to forget that. And now I'll just shoot him the email names. I'll email him the names. Perfect. Okay. So we're going to focus on today. So I always love to have an agenda. You know, our students like to know where we're going. All right, we're going to talk about the goal briefly. We're going to share out what you all know so far about experiential learning, if you've done anything with it. We'll talk briefly about the 4 parts of Kolb's cycle related to experiential learning. And we're going to focus on the last 2 parts in this presentation, and later I'll tell you why. If you have any questions at any time, just let me know. This is informal, okay? And it's Friday. Really want to emphasize these last 2 parts of Kolb's cycle. Let's see, last month, I reviewed something like 34 student reflections and 8 instructor reflections related to how they had embedded experiential learning activities in their courses. And I really found that many of them were missing the last 2 parts. Okay, so that's why we're going to focus more heavily on the last 2 parts of Kolb's cycle today. If you're not familiar with the big experiential learning push here at BSU, it's related to our overall strategic plan. And the goal really is that most of our faculty have a course that is endorsed for experiential learning. And the big idea is all you have to do is embed an approved experiential learning activity into your course in order for it to become endorsed. So you do an application, you say, hey, here's my big exciting idea that will be the experiential learning part of the course. And then usually what you need to do, Colin Walker will approve it. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end after we make sure we all understand what it means to have an experiential learning activity. There are 3 categories of activities. You only need 1. You do not have to put all of these 3 categories into your activity. So you might focus on some kind of research. These EL activities are focused on undergraduate courses. So keep that in mind. But your students might do some kind of research or inquiry activity. They might have something related to global citizenship. Or the 3rd category is really leadership and community engagement. So when you're thinking about your big ideas and your experiential learning activities, they should focus on one of these three categories. Is everybody good with that? Okay. When you have an approved experiential learning course, activity in your course, you do have 3 student objectives that are required. And at the end of your semester, those 3 objectives, the students will do reflections related to them, and you as an instructor will do a reflection related to these 3 goals too. Okay, and then I'll show you what these are. Okay, so students are going to reflect on these 3 objectives. Okay, how they do those reflections is up to the instructor. All right, they can do it verbally. They can do it through writing. They can do it through some kind of performance or presentation. And these are the 3 objectives. So students have to answer, okay, after participating in this experiential learning activity, how did you develop knowledge, skills, or values? So they have to answer that one. How they took initiative within this activity, how they made decisions, and how they were held accountable for those decisions. That's the second objective. And then for the third one, they need to talk about how they grew. And it can be related to any of these. How did they grow intellectually? What they learned? How did they grow creatively? Maybe did they notice some emotional or some social growth, or maybe even physical growth? So the big idea is when you're thinking about your experiential learning activity, you're thinking about how students will engage with these 3 objectives and how they'll be able to reflect on them at the end of the semester after they've done all the components of the EL activity. And keep in mind that you as an instructor will be reflecting on how your students did these things as well. Okay, is everybody good so far? Okay. All right, 2 things to get us started. Ladies online, you are welcome to either use the chat box, or if you want to take turns and contribute with your mic, totally fine. What I would like you to be thinking about is if you've done any EL activities or something you think maybe is related to an EL activity, any of your courses. That's the first one we'll talk about. And then if you've thought about applying for an EL endorsement for one of your courses. Okay. So I'll give you just a couple minutes to think on it, and then we'll share out if my 3 participants face-to-face, if you all want to chat about it, totally fine. You might want to record your ideas because we are going to come back to this at the end of the presentation. Okay. All right, I'm going to set a timer. We'll start with 5 minutes and see how it goes. And it's quiet. So just be thinking in general. You're like, well, I'm not sure what EL is yet. Just in general, have you done anything that you think is related to experiential learning in your courses?
Education formats. Real experience.
And will you display the chat for me?
So
Yeah.
that makes sense for us to do this like every day. I have to make an assessment. Whenever they assess the children on a certain standard or learning environment. They come back and reflect, and then they make some things based on where the children are. And then they teach the lessons, and they do a post-assessment, and then they
Yeah, hold that thought on field experience.
teach the kids what they needed to know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Also, you'll be thinking about, to go back, with your field experience, do your students address these 3 objectives? So if not, fine, but just be thinking about if they do in certain ways. Let me move that mouse on my screen. Thank you.
You know, specific courses.
Let's say on.
Within each class, to try to figure out, try to create. It's all of the stuff. Those of us that are teaching.
Zoom out just so they can turn their ears.
Can you show the prompts again?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And you said you teach.
Psychology. Yeah. I remember from undergrad, we did some experiential learning on my biology classes for animal behavior. He had us go out to the animal shelter.
Oh, Lorena, looks like good
I
stuff.
suppose just kind of getting associated with the animal shelter. And rules and everything, the additional classes were based on the content of the course, but the animal shelter and getting to design a project around the animals, using those animals to test on, usually just things like playing behavior and they prefer a certain strength or something like that. And I thought that was a really interesting experience because it's community outreach, but it's also getting hands-on experience with animals like cats and dogs that people. So I liked that. I struggled with specifically the part of the circle or the pathway, like taking risks and being held accountable. So often I feel like we need to structure them to make sure that they're having the right experience. Like, for example, the certain classes we do like a physiology lab where they dissect a sheep brain. And if we don't give them exact instructions on how to do it, they'll mess it up and then we won't be able to see anything.
So you can't use too much free reign.
Yeah. Yeah, you can kind of at the end once it's cut off, but near the beginning, you can't just say, well, just cut where you
Can you all hear? Okay, about the sheep brain, okay.
You should join sometime.
So I was a biology major when I was a student here, and I went to the bookstore, got my bucket, and then there was my sheep brain, my anatomy class, and my cow eye, and some other things, starfish. Yeah, but anyway, we digress. Okay, so I'm just gonna read out Gail's, I don't know if you guys can read that, so if you'll scroll up for me, Lena. On the chat box,
Oh,
yeah. All right. All right, Gail did mention field experience, all right, teaching a summer course of study abroad, could be that global citizenship piece, absolutely. All right, and then Lorena did an experiential activity in her trig course, good Lord, power to you. In the fall of 22, the activities about students engaging in undergraduate research, they chose a topic that had to do with multicultural perspectives, biographies of founders, how different cultures may approach solving problems differently, teaching and learning trigonometry to specific populations. Wow. And she wants to apply again, developing a refined version of what she did in the fall with other courses that she's currently teaching and will be teaching. Excellent. Lorena, do you want to tell us just a little bit about the things you're thinking about refining?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. Yes, I definitely want to refine various aspects, like because the fall was the first time I was doing this experiential activity, I noticed that, you know, I was students felt lost sometimes. They felt like, oh, it was the first time they were listening to things like do research, right? And they were kind of like, oh, what do you mean do research? I'm just a first year student or a second year student. What do you mean about doing research? Can I do real research? What is my topic? So they were kind of freaking out a little bit. So for this term, but I have a refined version, but I didn't apply for experiential learning this term, but like for this particular term, but I will be for the future. I will have like some predefined topics they could work on so they don't have to think so hard, okay, what could a research question be? Because setting a research question is very challenging and they want to take the initiative, and I want them to take the initiative, but I don't want them to feel so lost. So that's one thing I'm refining.
So do you mean that you may give them examples or research questions to select?
More examples, because I thought I gave them examples, but I didn't write it anywhere. So they kind of like, whoop, forgot about them. And I totally understand, like after the fact, that they were so confused. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them were really confused, like, okay, what is it supposed to be like? And especially they didn't go to class the day I explained those examples and things. They were kind of like, oh, we just didn't know anything. So yeah, I definitely I'm already, like in this term, I'm already incorporating undergraduate research, like they have projects in class, but I'm giving them a little bit more information about what could potentially be taken as a project or as a question, without doing their homework, but at least I guide them a little bit further.
Do you think you will be using any of the former projects or activities kind of as examples of what to do or maybe what not to do?
So, yeah, definitely. Now I have to say that the courses I'm teaching this term are not are different. They are not trigonometry. I'm not teaching trigonometry this term. However, I can say, well, I did this in the past, and the topic was trigonometry, like the main theme was trigonometry. This is a really good example, and this is something that didn't go quite well. That can already give them an idea of the standards, and that's great.
I can imagine being like a newer student, like and walking into trig and wait a minute, trig's already intimidating, especially for
A
somebody like.
little bit sometimes.
And then you want me to go out and do this research activity, like. Yeah, great
Yeah.
stuff. Thank you for the info. Gail, would you like to expand on what you were thinking about?
Well, I teach the Area F course 2124. It's the cultural perspectives is what it is. And we do 9 microcultures. I already, when I send them out in the field, it seems like when I took the course over, this was not a requirement for them to do anything else with their field experience. They just went and watched kids for 10 hours. So I have them reflect at the end of the semester on the 9 microcultures that I actually said, they're looking for class, race, gender differences, anything that they're watching these kids and going, oh, this impacted them this way, or this impacted them this way. So actually reflecting on that and bringing it all back around at the end of the semester to go, oh, now I see what I've learned all semester. Now I see what it is, how it impacts the children out in the field as teachers, but anybody can take this course. So.
Is there a way that you could have them do the reflection more around midterm and then take the reflections and change them into more of an activity for the second half of the semester?
You mean to actually use the activity with the students?
I mean, so
observing?
what I've noticed a lot of evaluations that people do like field experiences and write, observe, maybe do a little activity and the end reflect. And so we're going to talk about the last 2 pieces, but in the evaluations, a lot of instructors were missing the last 2 pieces. So they're ending with a reflection, but reflection is actually the second step. And we have to take that reflection, come up with a revised idea, and then implement that idea to hit all 4 pieces of Kolb cycle. But we'll talk about that more in depth. That's why I was just curious to get you think a little bit. Is there something that you could do? The reflections in the middle of the semester, and then they're going to change it and have something else to complete the cycle. But we'll talk about that a little bit. I have some examples.
Yeah, please. Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right. Kristen, we can put the camera on Kristen. You did share out a little bit about the sheep brain and such. Oh, yeah. But hang on, let's get the camera on again. Okay, fantastic. Oh, not yet. Keep going. Down the line. Yeah. I give you a lot of credit. I mean, I know you're jumping into this as a facilitator. All right.
Yeah, so this is a class that I'm new here. I just started last fall.
Welcome.
Thank you. This is one of the classes that I will be teaching now, kind of in my area is physiological psychology. And a lot of that is having lecture and then Friday lab periods. So they get experience with dissection and looking at certain small nervous systems. One of the big things that we do that is horrifying for some students and exciting for others is dissecting a sheep brain. And that usually comes with instructions from the instructor as to where to cut and how to look at it. And then at the end of that, once everything's all cut up, they can kind of do whatever they want with it. They can cut it up further, they can separate the pieces, look at it, ask more questions about what's in there. Kind of the thing that I've been struggling with in thinking about this course and how it might change in the future is the aspect of trial and error or letting them fail as part of experiential learning. I feel like so much that I would do in that class and I do in some of my other classes. For example, another class that I have is designing a measure, a test for types of measurements. Designing a test from beginning to end. So they come up with questions,
we send that out in a survey, we do reliability and validity measures, we come up with like a validated measure of some construct that they want to do. But if they fail too hard at any one of the points, they're just lost. So like, especially with like the sheep brain, if they cut it wrong the first time, it basically stops them from seeing what they need to see later on in the experiment. So I guess I struggle with finding more hands-off ways to still let them experiment, while also not ruining everything. So you go, well, it's messed up now, you can't finish your your project you worked so hard on, because I feel like it's also important for them to see what an ideal end product looks like.
I guess I have two questions. Great information. My first one is, do the sheep brain first. Do they work in pairs?
Depends on how many's in the class and how many sheep brains we have. Usually they do work in pairs.
Let me say you've got two brains, you screw one up, right? Okay, we learned from that one, we still have another one, so that was one of my thoughts.
That's true.
To your testing, so after they develop the assessment and look at validity and reliability, then do they go and actually administer the test?
So part of the process is I basically have it broken up into chunks. So the first thing they do is they come up with a whole bunch of questions that they want put on the test. And then we review it, and that usually means they review it and they say, oh, everything's fine, and then I have to review it and I go, oh, this is confusing, this is phrased in the question, we cannot ask this question, like this is way too personal.
Sure.
So I have to go over it at that point to make sure it's actually gonna work.
And then they revise?
Yeah, then they usually revise, but it's usually so like rephrase this as a question, they're not as a question, so they kind of, it's very obvious what they need to do.
So after that step, do they administer the assessment?
Yes, then they administer and then we collect the data and then we look at reliability.
Wow, so that, oh, it sounds like you may be getting all 4 pieces of that, very interesting, thank you for sharing. Yeah, Kendrick? You will share out briefly.
Yeah, so I'm actually here to try to see what it is, I have an idea because we've been hearing a lot, but how to get that into an English class, right? Because a lot of us in the English department, if we're not teaching one of our classes that we have tagged with experiential learning, like one of our journals, like ORDEC, or journalism, or our students are actually getting hands-on experience development, producing. In our regular English classes, it's kind of hard for us to conceptualize the experiential learning project. One of the things I had in mind for my African American lit class is have them do like an ancestral trace of their history using ancestral database in the library. And having them, once they find out some things, to kind of present that, and then have them to reflect on or talk about what were some of the tools that they needed to use, because in doing that kind of research, you have to go to census records and all different kinds of records and doing kind of those things. But I'm just having a problem conceptualizing like projects that would fit into an English class, because we don't have those kind of field things.
Sure.
In other fields, right, that we could have.
Well, it sounds like you have 3 of the first step, so we can just get back to, okay, they have their questions, they go and maybe find their data, and then reflecting on their data, and then if we can take what they reflected upon and turn it into this final piece, it sounds like maybe you're 1 step away. So interesting stuff, I love it. All right, Rebecca, with the camera a little bit.
One of the classes that I was thinking about was my assessment course, and I already told them they have field experience, and so and how I've done it in the past is I modeled how to do the assessment plan, and we looked at the fake data, which they were like my fake kids, and they pretended to be 2nd grade age or whatever, and I made them do the actual assessment, and then we looked at the data of who knows what. And then we have to look at like what are our lesson plans based on this data? How are we going to create lesson plans for 3 days? But then my reflection, the reflection piece I've always say kind of to the end. So I'm kind of confused with abstract conceptualization. Is that where they would create their own assessment to use in the field?
That's what we're going to talk about in depth. Yes, great question. Okay. Get it back for me. I get used to this class of ASL a lot, so it's fun. Okay, thank you all for sharing out. Great ideas. I think you guys have a lot of stuff we can just kind of tweak, so I'm excited. What I didn't mention when I opened was It is part of our strategic plan, but also once you have an EL endorsed course, it's like at the Board of Regents level and it's listed. So basically, VSU wants to have many of those courses that we teach here campus-wide in that database that, oh, wow, VSU has a whole bunch of EL endorsed courses. And another way to draw students in and keep them. Yes, Gail.
I just want to add this to what you just said. I recently got my certificate for online teaching, and you may be really surprised that the percentage of EL endorsed courses in the online platform is 0. So, I mean, a great way to figure out how to take this and kind of turn it into something online as well. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, thank you for that information. That's great stuff. And we need to be changing the way we maybe think and do some things. Okay. So Kolb's cycle. Okay, I know some of you have seen this before. Students start with a concrete experience. Okay, so when you all are thinking about your activities, real quick, what is your concrete experience? Okay, Rebecca?
I model it,
Okay, modeling it, so your students are watching you model something
and they're participating, they're being my faith.
and participating, okay. Kendrick, what do you think as far as that concrete experience?
The purpose is to acquire data in order to get the information needed to produce the project.
So they are going to find the data first.
Yes.
Okay, that would be a concrete experience. With that sheet, brain, or test, which one?
I think test would probably be easiest to talk about. We usually start off and take some tests ourselves. So we take some good ones, some validated ones, we take some invalid ones, like some BuzzFeed quizzes, like what cheese are you, like,
Yeah.
and we look at the differences and we look at some other ones in the middle that are maybe confusing, and so that.
Great example. So they are participating in different assessments. Yes, Lorena?
I think the concrete experience is that I'm trying to remember what the concrete experience would be in my case. I guess, the concrete experience is that they choose a topic of research. They start planning on what they have to do in order to answer the research question. Then they put a presentation together and they are finally presenting that information to the class. And there are some checkpoints like that we have with classmates that I put them in groups so that they share stuff with their classmates.
Okay, so starting out the formulation of their topic or their research question, okay?
Yeah.
Gail?
Okay, so I'm going to kind of backtrack a little, maybe forward track a little. I'm thinking the reflective observations would be our actual field experience, right?
Do you mean the concrete experience or the reflective observations?
I'm thinking the reflective, no, see, that's where I'm getting confused. So would their concrete experience actually be the field experience where they're actually out watching the kids? Okay, well. Then
Yep. So thank you all.
That's why we're here.
So concrete is a demonstration, all right? It can be a simulation. It can be field work. Gail nailed it. It could be observations, even if they're video observations. So the students are having some kind of experience to get them started on the thinking process. Okay, does that help? Go with me. Good. I see you're starting in here. Okay, so to give you an idea of what you're starting out with a concrete experience with your students. So reflective observations, Gail mentioned, they participate in their field experience, do their observations, looking for 9 different, you said cultural.
Microcultures.
Thank you, microcultures. And then they reflect on it. So Gail has these 2 steps, right? All right, they take the test, they reflect on, good or bad test, valid, reliable, okay, how it can be better, all right? They engage in thinking about African-American historical people, right? And then they're probably thinking, where can I find all these data? Kind of what are my questions? What have I learned so far? All right, Rebecca, help me out here on your reflective observation part.
Guess they would reflect on our fake data and what, and me as the teacher, what would I need to teach following, knowing this data?
Sure, because they have it, and then they're thinking about objectives and how is that gonna lead their instruction, right? Okay. Many times in your reflective observation, you want to provide prompts, right? You want to kind of guide their reflection to make sure they're going in the direction that you need them to go. So you might ask them, what items are most important to document after you've participated in your concrete experience? What might you do differently? So you did this activity, you participated in these tests, you looked for these 9 microcultures in field experience. What might you do differently after you participated in this activity? How does the activity connect to your prior experiences? Were you aware of these 9 microcultures before? Were you aware of the vast history of African American people, etc.? Okay, so those are the 2 pieces, and most people have been strong in those 2 pieces. All right. So how do we get from the student's reflection next to the abstract conceptualization? Okay, are we all good so far? Okay. Do you guys have any ideas as far as the abstract conceptualization part? If you don't, it's okay. Gail?
Well, for my students, one of the things that I want them to do is understand how these 9 microcultures impact their students and how it impacts their classroom community, their school community, and how we need to understand our microcultures before we can go and teach anybody, because we have to teach everybody.
So they've reflected on those 9 microcultures. Then what are you going to ask them to do with everything they reflected upon? They've got this new information from their reflections. Then what are they going to do with it?
Well, I have them write a paper at the end, and they reflect on the 9 microcultures, and they talk about how that impacts them as future teachers. Not all of them are future teachers, but we try to connect to whatever they're doing. So we make those connections and realize that, and their papers are actually very interesting, because they do come to a lot of realizations that there's all these biases, when they're out in the field. So they're actually looking at those different things when they're out there. So when they're reflecting on it, they can understand how that's going to impact their classroom community in the end, if that makes sense.
Yes, but how can they take what they reflected upon? How can they implement it into some kind of new activity during the semester? Can they go out to, I was gonna say the mall, but we don't really use the mall anymore. How can they go to a different environment and observe and take, oh, what I learned from these 9 microcultures. Oh, I see that right here. Kind of thinking about it. The field experience are not really implementing any lessons, are they? So just
No.
observation.
They're just observing in most cases. Some teachers do let them collaborate in the classroom, but in most cases they're just observing. But now I do have them do another activity after they've done, because they start with a microculture activity in the beginning where they look at themselves and they talk about their own microcultures. And then they go out in the field and they observe in the field, and then they look for microcultures there in the field. And then they have to do an interview with someone also, where they're actually looking for microcultures that are they have to choose someone that's different than them. And at least 2 of the 9 microcultures. So then they're making that connection back to that. And they, over the term, they have several realizations of, God, I didn't realize that I had all these implicit bias,
So 2 connected questions. So they observe the field experience. You said they do reflections about those 9 microcultures. You said they also interview somebody. So after they've reflected on it, maybe they're changing some of their interview questions, right, as part of this conceptualization. And then they're taking that and doing the active experimentation with the interview. So maybe you have the pieces, maybe they're just slightly out of sequence. And then do you have them, you said they do a final paper, do you have them present that to anybody?
Yes, they present them in class.
And then do their peers give them feedback?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe you do have these pieces, maybe just need to expand them a little bit, or, kind of rework them just a tad.
You may be my best friend today.
Rebecca.
Would my abstract conceptualization be that they create their own assessment?
Well, I'm gonna hold yours because I'm gonna walk you through, I've got a similar example.
Okay.
So I'm gonna share that with everybody, and then if you still have a question, let me know.
Okay.
Okay, are y'all okay if we move on? Okay. So kind of like with Gail's example, between observing and field experience and what they know already, they've been their self-assessment on their biases, right? They're making connections between their previous experience, right, and what they already know. So what they came into the classroom with, what they learned from their concrete experience, what they thought about in their reflections, all right, now they're making connections. And they're thinking about, well, how could this experience be useful in the future? How am I going to take my knowledge of these 9 microcultures, right, and apply it into my future as an educator? They might be making a concept map to relate everything so far in the cycle. They might be developing some analogies, and these are just ideas. They're not, you don't have to do these things. These are just ways that students are going to take their experience and their reflection and refine their idea and basically come up with a new and improved idea, right, from everything they've learned to this point. Okay, does that make sense so far? And they're going to take these new ideas and it's going to lead them into a next experiment or activity to apply what they've taken away from these pieces of the cycle. Okay. So for the active experimentation, wrong way. Some ideas, a new experience. So they had their concrete experience, they reflected, came up with new ideas, and now we're going to take project A that's morphed into project B and have our students implement it. They might do a case study. They could do some role playing. Maybe they're going to engage in a different kind of or modified simulation. They're going to take the pieces they've done in the cycle and apply it to a new experience. Okay, so maybe that new experience is interviewing maybe 1 or 2 people, you know, who are totally different and also from the student. So different ideas there. So some ideas, questions, comments, and I have some examples to take you through the cycle. Kristen?
Yes. I'm having trouble distinguishing between reflective observations and abstract conceptualization. They feel
Okay.
very similar.
Okay, great question. We're going to reflect on what we did here in our concrete experience. We're going to reflect on it, and we're going to take that info and basically refine our ideas.
Okay.
Through our reflection, we're going to come up with an even better idea next time, and then we're going to put that even better idea into action. Does that help?
Yeah, so abstract conceptualization is kind of like the planning phase.
You're taking what you've taken your first experience, you reflect, oh, wow, wouldn't it be cool if, oh, wow, this is a great idea, I could. And they're putting the new idea together based on the concrete experience and their reflection.
Okay.
And then with the active experimentation, they're going to carry out the new idea. Okay, does that help? Okay. I'm lip reading Gail. All right. Okay. I want to show you just a couple of ideas of this whole cycle. I teach an asynchronous online reading course. Okay, my students have to know how to teach reading to deaf kids. Okay. They start out with reading assessment, like we talked about. They can pick any K-12, DHH, deaf and hard of hearing learner. It doesn't matter what language the student uses, whether spoken English or whether they use sign. They have to administer 3 tests to document their students' reading level. And then within their lesson plans they're going to develop, they also have to include a pre-post test. Okay. So they're starting out with assessment. From those assessment data, they have to develop objectives across 4 areas of literacy. So they've administered the test, had their experience, they reflected upon it. Ooh, okay, well, based on where Sally performed on phonology, here would be a great objective for Sally. So they develop their objectives and they have to cover 4 areas of literacy. Okay. After they deliver each of their 4 lesson plans, they have to do a reflection. And I give them specific prompts on our discussion board in Blazeview. So I guide their reflection, they engage in the reflective portion. All right. Then they go back and, oh, darn it. And modify their lesson plans because they have 4. They're all with those database objectives. They teach the first one. They reflect on it. Oh man, I should have done this with Sally instead when I was working on phonology. They're going to change it for subsequent lesson plan. Okay, for lesson plan number 2, they're gonna teach it, they're gonna reflect on it again, they're gonna make changes for lesson plan 3. Same again, so they're moving between these pieces of the cycle. All right. So forward arrow, Jennifer. Okay. Also, the thing with Kolb cycle is you might not always start in one place. You can start in any place in the cycle. I see Lorena bobbing her head because this was mentioned before when we went to a section. You can start in any place. It's a cycle. Okay. Doesn't mean it necessarily ends at this last part. You might have another concrete experience, etc. At the very end of this project, they do across the semester, so repeated lesson plans, repeated reflections, where they're tailoring it, making it better. They have to do a presentation to their peers. They do a 10-minute video with guidance of, here was a brief explanation of each lesson plan. Here's how my student performed based on my pre-test, post-test for each lesson. So they give a big picture presentation to their peers, and then they have to watch so many peer videos and reflect on those as well. Okay, so that's how I use this in an education setting.
So I'm a little confused. Is your reading assessment and develop and deliver lesson plans? Is that all your concrete?
So concrete, yes, it would be. So they do the assessment. They're thinking about the data, coming up with the objectives. They're going to implement them, see how they go, come back and change them. So they are kind of going between the cycle pieces. Is that kind of your question?
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out what are your 4 parts.
So doing the assessment.
Is your concrete?
They're engaging in the assessment. They're reflecting on the assessment practice, right? And coming up with objectives that they want to later implement. Okay. They are putting those objectives into lesson plans and delivering them. After they do that, they're thinking, ooh, lesson plan 1 went well. Okay, then they're going to go back and develop lesson plan 2, and they're going to reflect on it.
Okay.
And then in the end, they have delivered all 4. They've reflected on each one, and they're going to tell their peers all about it in their presentation.
So the presentation is your what? Your abstract?
It's down here. It probably should be over here. The 10-minute video recorded. It would be back to my cycle, the active experimentation. For my students in this, because it doesn't fit as nicely, like check, done. But the active experimentation is they're reflected on it. Okay, I'm going to change this in lesson plan 1. Okay, I'm going to change this in lesson plan 2. And then the very end, having the accountability with the presentation to their peers and instructor. Does that help?
Kind of.
Still a book.
Mine's exactly like yours, so I just need to figure out where it goes.
Okay. Okay.
Jennifer,
Yes.
the reflective observations, are those only specifically the student themselves, or could this be teacher reflection and reflection from your peers, like receiving the feedback from your peers and using that to later implement? Does a reflective piece, does it have to be just the individual, or can it also be reflections from their peers?
I'm sure it could be expanded in my case because they're already doing so much. They read each other's peer reflections, but they're not required, the students themselves are not required to implement anything from their peers' reflection into their own change in the cycle. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm just thinking, in our field, and Rebecca's probably sitting there thinking the same thing. Man, we do reflective teaching all the time. This is what we constantly have them going, okay, what was wrong here? What was good here? So we're constantly doing that reflective piece. So I wonder how we can make that, because it's just natural in the teacher world, so I wonder how we can embed that there as well.
Well, I think it's a lot of teach, reflect, change, teach, reflect, change. And so in the end, as far as the cycle for my specific class, they're taking all 4 lesson plans, all of their reflections they've done related to each one, all of their students' database performance, and putting it into one presentation that's kind of like okay, I changed all these things. And then in the end, okay, well, here's all the things that worked. Here's the things that maybe moving forward, when I'm a real classroom teacher, I would do differently. But the accountability of presenting it to their peers with these pieces are embedded into it.
So let me ask this, just going back to Rebecca's assessment piece. When they they're doing their fake students and her, she's practicing with them. They're reflecting on that. They're figuring out how they're going to, and later, correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca, but later they create a lesson plan for their students that they're implementing in the field. Wouldn't that be her that developed that last piece?
Absolutely could be. And they might do it more than once too. You know, if you have multiple lessons, for sure. The thing is having the experience, reflecting on it, making changes, having another experience. So again, it does come back to the cycle. It's not necessarily just once through the cycle.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions or comments right now? I know we focus a lot on the education side for my English and science people and math people. Okay, so here's an example from sociology, criminal justice. They collaborated. I don't expect you to be able to read the article, but I will highlight it. This was in the Boston Daily Times. Okay, so I'll show you what they did as far as the pieces of the cycle. So their concrete experience, the students received a data set and different trends in pedestrian and cyclist safety. Okay, so they looked at the data that they were provided. The students sent research questions after they reviewed the data. They sent research questions to their professor. Okay, that was their concrete experience. Here's the data, take a look at it, come up with some questions, kind of like Lorena was talking about. They reflected on their data analysis when they had that data set. Okay, they reported their research questions to others, their instructor, to others. They identified within that data set, oh, I'm thinking about this research question. Okay, in this data set, what are the variables here that I can analyze to answer my question? And then based on that, they gave short reports to the instructor. Okay, so those were the first two pieces of it. They had the data, they came up with some questions, they presented it to others for feedback. Okay. Then they identified additional ways that they could analyze the data. So they had a surface level data analysis. Now they're going to dive deeper within their reflection. So additional ways they could analyze the data. How could they answer their questions they came up with using the data set? And then they sent a summary of what they found in their data set related to their 3 questions to the instructor. So they worked with the data, they came up with questions, they analyzed the data further with the reflection process and came up with a bigger idea. Then they put those additional ideas into practice. All right, they did more data analysis. They combined both of their sets of data from their initial questions to the refined questions. They answered the questions that they had generalized, and then they shared the results with their instructor and with the South Georgia Regional Commission. And that's the picture you see from the newspaper when they were sharing out their data. Okay, so they looked at the data, analyzed it, came up with questions, analyzed the data again, came up with questions, had a summary, and they were accountable for presenting it to a community organization. Okay, questions or comments about this example? Clear?
It's the perfect example for me. it's just, you just nailed it, like really good.
It's not an education one. So remember, when you are thinking about experiential learning endorsement, remember it's one activity. It doesn't have to be this full semester long thing. It's an activity with these 4 pieces, and the students must address these objectives. So when you're planning for it, make sure that your activity is providing students an opportunity to respond to all of these in a reflective manner. And this is these reflections are at the end of the semester. Okay. All right. So you can do it individually. You can do it with a partner. I want you to take your ideas you shared and see if you can make them fit into these 4 parts of Kolb cycle. Okay. I left some of the prompts up here as you're going through it. All right, so now is an opportunity. Maybe you'll leave here with, hey, I have a pretty solid idea, but now is an opportunity to try and refine your ideas that you brought to the table to make it fit into these 4 pieces. Okay. Questions before we start working again? No? Am I nervous? Because it's like quiet. Everyone's like, all right, think about it for a couple minutes, jot down some notes, and then we'll come back. Okay, everybody good? Okay. I'll do 5 minutes and see where we're at.
Jennifer, can you
Yes.
tell me your, just so I can figure out what your 4 are?
For the reading thing?
Yes. Your concrete is,
The concrete, they do the reading assessments.
is it assessments you've already created and they just give?
They use like the John BRI, and then they use, if their student is a signer, they use a sign language rubric. So they buy the BRI, but I do tell them which assessments to use. All right. They take their data, they do a reflection, and they develop their objectives.
So they administer these reading.
Correct.
Training, and then the reflection is on the data.
Yes, to come up with objectives.
And then your abstract.
You're taking those objectives, putting them in their lesson plans. And they do go back and reflect on each lesson plan after they implement it. So they're going back to the reflective observation too. Kind of moving through the cycle a little bit. And then with their active experimentation, they're based on their reflection, they're revising each of the 4 lesson plans after they've taught it. So each lesson plan itself, again, is kind of like a concrete experience, right? And then they're going to reflect on each one and change the next one. So reflecting on each one to change the next one they implement. And then for me in my course, the active experimentation part is also the presentation to their peers and to the instructor through the 10-minute video.
So the active experimentation is revising each lesson, teaching it, and the PowerPoint video.
And at the end, presenting.
Okay.
Does that help?
What is a concept map?
A concept map is you're making some kind of visual organizer to show how your pieces are related. Yeah, could be like a bubble map. You got a bubble and you have some bubbles around it, different ones. Hendrik, one thing I've been thinking about, because I read about it in somebody's evaluation. But they ended up kind of similar vein to what you're talking about, but they ended up like setting up booths to give information about like their topic. So maybe if your students selected, a historical African American person, then maybe all your students set up booths and people walked around and they just gave a quick feel about their figure from history. Maybe something like that would apply. Or maybe they did a role play to act out, a historical scene or something. Sheet brain, I don't really know. I remember when I had my sheet brain, like it all just looked the same.
Yeah.
But you cut it out, still looks the same.
It's because in all the pictures, they always have it like color coded exactly what you're supposed to look for. And then when you get it, it's all just gray.
Yes, it's just a whole bunch of gray.
Gray and white.
Yes, yeah, I remember that. Trigonometry, I'm just thinking about, wow, real world problems and solutions with trigonometry. Yeah, not
There
not
are-
a math person.
There are things, one of the positive outcomes of the whole experience for students and for me is that they found stuff that surprised them, and they found stuff that surprised me. So because they were so free to choose, whatever was relevant to their careers or just whatever came to their minds, I let them roam free. And some of them felt really lost, but some others really took it like, okay, I'm free. Then they started coming up with all sorts of things, and I was like, wow, this is really, it goes far. So many of them started with like, yeah, what can I find? But if you want to take trigonometry with me, you will find something.
Well, to me, the whole of this experiential learning, right? Find you a real world problem. Take what you know, get some more information and propose a real world solution to it, right? That's, to me, that's kind of the essence of experiential learning. And
Yeah,
a lot of students like, "Ooh, I would just like to sit here for a lecture, please," right?
yeah, I know. Yeah. And it's like, no, you gotta do something. And I'm all for it. And I provide guidance whenever necessary. And sometimes it's totally out of my league, even though I know trigonometry very well, but because they come up with certain things that are very specific to their fields or to their interests. And it was like, oh man, that sounds very interesting. I'm not sure I can help you, but yeah, maybe have you done this and that? That's a very general things. I could provide some really general guidance, but it was awesome. Yeah, it's
But your
awesome.
testimony about they learn new things and the instructor learned new things is like, wow, that's what's supposed to happen. So that's-
Yes, it's just amazing. I had a really positive experience and I'm refining it. And now that I'm seeing like more and I'm learning more from you, and that example that you gave was just so good, like you just nailed it really good. Then I'm all for it. It's just great.
Well, I love it. That's great. So your students, when you're thinking about your big cycle, right, your students need to be answered. Well, how did I develop knowledge? What skills did I develop? How did I develop those skills related to this experiential learning activity, right? How did maybe my values change? Thinking about microcultures, how did some of my values change? Or thinking about African-American historical figures. How did this activity influence me to think in different ways, right? How they took initiative, and reading through some of the student evaluations are like, well, you know, I was on the team and we just had somebody else who took over. Okay, so how individually are your students going to take initiative without being placed in a group that maybe you got one very powerful group leader, right? So making sure we're providing opportunities in our experiential learning activity for each student to take initiative. Maybe we got some assigned roles in a group, right? Or maybe they get to pick their role in the group to increase motivation. They should be able to say, well, I made these decisions in this activity, and this is how I made these decisions. I administered this assessment, right? And I took my data and I looked at them and I made these decisions on these objectives. They should be able to talk about how they grew. I learned new things. Yay, I solved a trigonometry problem I didn't know the answer to before. Yay, okay, I found this, this, and this in a sheet brain. I didn't know that before, right? Those kinds of things. So again, I don't want to harp on it, but when you're going through your activity, make sure that your students will be able to answer these objectives in the reflections at the end. Okay, who would like to share out maybe any new ideas you came up with while you were thinking about this again? Oh, Gail, I saw that. Anybody want to share out?
I'll share. I think I'm moving toward, I'm not there by any means, but I'm moving toward, I've pulled up all my documents for the assessments and I'm like, oh my gosh, how can I change this and make this? So I'm thinking if I start the semester the same with their introduction being their microcultures where they're reflecting on themselves, they've got the 9 microcultures, that's what we talk about the first several weeks anyway. And then the unfortunate part with this class is that we kind of have to wait on everybody else to do their job for them to get out into the field. But I'm thinking we're coming up on midterm now. When is midterm? Does anybody know?
March, like 8th or 6th or ish. I got it written down.
Okay, so we should be good for them to at least have at least one field experience where they could have at least gone out for an hour and looked specifically for those 9 microcultures.
Right.
And then maybe that could be their midterm grade as they write that paper on those 9 macrocultures that they saw in their field experience. And then from those observations, they're going to realize, okay, how these 9 microcultures impact children, which children turn into adults, and then to turn around and write their questions for their interview for their microculture interview with an adult. We don't let them interview the kids, but with an adult, it has to be an 18-year-old at least. And but this is where I'm stuck. Like, how do I have them culminate the whole thing in the end into an active experimentation?
Could they do a peer activity? You know, could they get with a partner or two in the class and do some kind of activity based on their experience with the kids, based on their interview with the adults, their new understandings? Is there something they could do with their peers? Or could they go out into the community and do something? Or could they?
See,
do
I was thinking,
an
man,
activity with students?
how cool would it be if I could have them presenting to like school, you know, like during a I don't know, I don't want to say school board meeting because that would be too grandiose, but maybe even just some
Some high school class.
maybe maybe even a teacher workshop or something, you know?
Then you're exactly on the right track. How do we take it away from this brick and mortar right here, especially for our online students? How do we take it out of here and into the community or into the venues that our students care about? Right, like when they took with the pedestrian safety, when they presented it to a council that cares, you know, that's one of their missions to focus on. How do
But
we
then what if that
our
fails,
students
Jennifer?
to the community?
that-
I'm sorry, Gail.
What if that fails? Like, what if they don't actually get to do the present? Like, what if in my brain, I'm like, oh, this is a great idea. I can make this happen. And then, I mean, you know, schools are schools. And what if the school that said we would let you do it ended up saying, no, we can't have y'all come do it. What if
Then
it
you
fails?
pivot it, right? And maybe they video it and maybe they post it to YouTube and, you know, get viewer feedback. You know, there's ways to pivot and still get their message out, even if it's not your original intended audience, right? Or maybe you go to another school, or maybe you video record it and maybe they get to show it next semester. Right, there's ways to pivot, and if you feel like it fails, like if you get the endorsement and you make it all the way through, and you get to here and you feel like your students, oh man, well, here are some barriers and they couldn't do it, you put it in your reflection. And then next time I would do X, Y, Z instead.
There
There's
is
so many ways to
also
pivot.
I want to say that there is also the undergraduate research symposium that there is here at VSU, and you can take your students and say, hey, at the end of the class or the course or whatever, maybe you want to go and present a poster, or you want to create a presentation, or you want to write a paper. That can also that can be like real good way to get them to active experimentation and to show their product, and you know, you get to, it's real good.
Lorena, that's an excellent idea. Absolutely.
Don't tell them at
We
the
had-
meeting don't tell them at the meeting this afternoon that I did not think of that.
I won't be there, so. But no, great idea, Lorraine. But also, you know, I don't know if any of us have only online learners in the courses we're talking about, but we would have to think about, you know, like how can, so just for example, like in our audiology class that our students have to take, like they go and shadow an audiologist in their area. Right, so just things like that too, we're using their resources if they're not here, if they're not on campus. But yeah, great idea about one venue.
Right.
Other thoughts y'all would like to share out? Any new ideas that maybe you will implement?
Well, and thinking about my project and thinking about not only the African-American famous people in African-American history, but also thinking more particularly about the students themselves, because a lot of them, I know for me and doing my ancestor research, I didn't have a lot of knowledge than you know my grandparents, but having them to do their own specific project on their lineage, their research by using the database and gathering data for that as a concrete experience, and looking at census records, marriage certificates, and talking about what kind of information they're having to use to get that data, and then reflect on what they learn about their family, what did the records show about the household makeup, because the census records tell you about what kind of work they did, how many people in the household, and then how does that connect to the periods that we're covering in African American life. Like we go through the Reconstruction period, Black arts movement, Harlem Renaissance. Can they see kind of some of those things in the records about what they find as well? And then for their abstract project, they should have a family map that they can create, linking their ancestry, and see how far they can go back and what happens when they get to the point of slavery, how difficult it become, right? You know, when you're, you know, were you able to go back even further beyond those kind of records? Then for the active experimentation, maybe have them present this to their family and record what kind of questions did the family ask about the project and things of that nature, and also compose a brief project of how would you explain to someone how to do this research? to see if they remember what kind of sources that they had to look at to construct the project.
I like both of those. I'm wondering if you could have any connection with Dr. Copeland's museum.
Oh, I
If you could
just
have your,
wondered.
if you could have your students maybe do any short presentations
Yeah.
there, that would be a nice community connection. Yeah. Great
They
ideas.
scan QR codes, you could have them do YouTube videos that they scan and put up the QR code and then listen,
Well, great idea. Great idea. Love it. Love all this productivity. Anybody else want to share anything else out? Kristen, you good? Okay, no pressure. Okay. So next steps. Right? The deadline, if you want to apply, if you want to finalize your activity and apply, is February 27th for this semester. That's the deadline. Application is not too extensive. Lorena, you've done it before. I know that Colin has simplified some of the forms related to the process because he's told us that several times. So it shouldn't be too tough. You've already got your ideas. You've already got your 4 pieces. The application will guide you right through that. This is a link to the application. Maybe. Listen. Oh, okay. Gonna work. Okay. Gotta go over here. Some information, the deadline again. There are examples embedded in the web page if you need to look at some more examples. Let's see. More information on this is the point, but here's where you would go. Okay. And also something very important, if your students are going to need funds in order to participate in your experiential learning activity, once your activity is approved, once you submit your application, Colin will give you the link to do a seed grant. I can't remember, it's like up to $6,000 or something crazy. So in your plan, you say, oh, well, students are going to need funds in order to participate in this activity because they're going to need X, Y, and Z. So after you do your application for the course endorsement, then you can go and apply for the ELC grant if you need funding to help your students participate in your activities. Okay, so it's a 2-step process. First, you have to submit your application. So if you think you're going to need some funding, go ahead and do it early so you can turn around and apply for funds. Okay. Questions related to these?
I have a question.
Yes.
So if we complete our application and it has some things that aren't quite beautiful, do we receive it back with feedback? Or do we
Yes.
have to wait for another cycle to come back around?
I don't know on the wait period. Lorraine, I don't know if you can answer that, but I do know that Colin will give you great feedback if needed.
Yeah, he would provide a lot of feedback. Colin is really good. He answers, he's very diligent. Like, I'm pretty sure he would guide you through the process and guide you through whatever you need.
Thanks.
Sure. So let's see, they're anticipating funding 3 to 5 proposals. So if you do need funding to go with your experiential learning activity. Oh, I said 6, sorry, 4,000. 4,000 is max. Some examples here, going to Jacksonville for Russian language culture activities. Science students going to Okefenokee to collect samples and process them. So just some different ideas, but so 2-pronged process. As far as apply first, I'll give you feedback, and if needed, apply for funds related to your experiential learning activity. So any other final thoughts, any questions for me?
This is great.
I'm
This
glad
is amazing. Thank you so much. It's like
You're
I'm very, very positive about applying for a course endorsement again. And I thought I already had a refined version of the activity, but I can already see lots of things I can do. Not so many really. It's just like kind of like shuffling things around. I can do some reshuffling to make the activity even better. which is
Even
still
just-
about research, still about
Yeah,
my
I
kind of
know.
research. So it's a continuation of what I'm doing, but with other courses.
Yeah.
Just
Just think about your connection to like high school trick too, like, so first of all, like high school kids, I see college kids like, cool, right? They're cool. I remember being in high school, I remember looking at the comments, but even if your students went to high school trig class and explained what they
That's
did.
true. Yeah, and actually, I mean, it's great. I'm just thinking of a lot of ideas right now, like with the active experimentation part. Now that you got that really like going within me, like you really like nailed it. I have to say it again. I got so many ideas from here, and I'm getting even more. But we're thinking of like, oh, can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you, I mean, it was blurry and I was just gonna adjust the camera a little bit
Oh, it was
faster,
blurry.
I can hear you.
So, yeah, so they can get and go to high school, and that way we get more students interested in math, because we do struggle with getting enough students in math.
That too.
So it's just like, I learned this thing, what was that? Dovetailing. So it's like doing so many things at the same time that are so good for everybody, for the department, for me, for the students. And
But
it just,
great point about recruiting.
exactly, it's like
Yes.
doing some sort of recruitment. I mean, not that we're doing it for recruitment, but it's just really like, I just see like a lot of stuff now. You
Yeah.
open my eyes.
Exciting, Kristen, let's get the camera on you.
So with applying for endorsement, is this kind of like a tag that the course always has, or does this need to be reapplied every year? Or
That is a
semester?
great question for Colin, because I don't know the
Okay.
answer to that. It's a great question.
Okay.
I feel like once it's endorsed,
Okay.
and you maybe just kind of refine your activity over and over, but definitely follow up with him, because I'm not sure.
And then another question, how do you navigate, or how other people navigated courses that are taught by multiple professors? Because like my test and measurements course could be taught by 3 or 4 different people. So when I teach it, this is what I do, but when somebody else teaches it, they don't do this activity.
Yeah,
So
in multiple sections. That's a great
Yeah.
question. Again, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I would ask Colin.
Yeah.
He's great at responding quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, those are 2 great questions. I just don't know the answer.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
asked.
Lorraine, is your hand up? No, okay. Any other last minute final thoughts, questions? Y'all gonna be like this tomorrow or today?
This has been great. I mean, it's just brought clarity for a lot of us in English that have questions about what are we doing in English for experiential learning? It's like, we do writing and research and stuff like that, but how can we connect it to beyond our active courses of the autodidactic and journals that we have students produce? So this has been very helpful.
I appreciate it. I'm glad. Anything else? If y'all have any follow-up questions, this is my email. If it's anything I can help you with.
I
Adios.
wanted to mention something. So right now, it just came to my mind again, just thinking like, because you really opened my eyes. So there's been, right now, there are lots of things going on with funding for multiple things and restructuring of some programs and such and such and such. And the university has been looking into connecting more with the community and the needs of the community and businesses, and maybe incorporating more projects into courses so that there's some sort of outcome that might be presented to businesses and such. I mean, an active experimentation can be go to a business and present your results, and maybe you get some sort of internship. I mean, not you, but the student can get some sort of internship, or they get some contacts in the future, like maybe, reaching the community in some way, or businesses with the final product of whatever it is that they did. Or maybe even starting the project, or I'm thinking my project. I'm sorry, I'm very selfish here. So, like the project, even the topic of a project can be linked to some of the needs of the community, or the needs of a specific business, and then that final product can be like a presentation.
Absolutely. One of the examples I didn't present here There was a group of students, they met with, people who were in charge of downtown
Exactly.
and said, okay, here are the downtown people said, here are some issues we're struggling with. Students took those ideas, came up with some
Exactly.
solutions and brought them back, right, to the
That
community.
would totally
Some of those were
align
implemented.
with that. That just totally aligns with expanding, and getting to serve the community better.
Absolutely, our regional area, absolutely. Yeah, love the community connections and get our students here and then apply and contribute to the community, right? All right, well, thank you all for coming on Friday. I certainly appreciate your time. Like I said, if you have any follow-up questions, I love that sign. Good job, Gail. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me. And like I said, Colin is always really great about responding as well. So thank you all and have an awesome weekend.